did this. Let me tell you something. God gonna have his way with you because there was no reason for this to happen today.
They came with broken hearts, holding flowers and framed memories, dressed in black, trying to honor the life of a young man who meant everything to them. What they didn't know was that in just moments, the church would turn into a battlefield, and they'd be shot beside his casket. This wasn't a war zone. It was a sanctuary. A sacred space meant for grieving, prayer, and peace. But peace never came. This is not just a crime story. This is not just a headline. This is the gut-wrenching truth about a family that was shattered, not once, but twice, by the same violence they begged the system to stop. On the afternoon of October 15th, 2022, 20-year-old John James Horn Jr. stood with his friends at a Sunoco gas station in Pittsburgh's North Side. He wasn't doing anything illegal. He wasn't out to hurt anyone. He was just trying to live his life in a world that had already made surviving feel like a full-time job. But in a matter of seconds, a black SUV pulled up. Gunfire erupted. People screamed. Two innocent women, waiting at a nearby bus stop, were hit by stray bullets. And John, full of dreams, with a future he hadn't even begun to live, was gunned down in broad daylight. The city mourned. The family wept. And the streets went silent. For a moment. 13 days later, John's loved ones gathered at the Destiny of Faith Church on Brighton Road. They were not just there to remember. They were there to release pain, to hold each other, to say goodbye. They asked for police presence. They told the authorities they feared something might happen. And they were right. Because that day, as mourners sat inside the church clinging to tissues and prayer, gunmen pulled up outside and opened fire. Again. Bullets sprayed the sacred space. Chaos took over. Children screamed. 5 people were shot, including a young boy. All of it on the very day this family tried to bury their son in peace. What do you do when the funeral becomes another crime scene? What do you say when the system knew there was danger and still let this happen? This is the story of a young man who never made it to 21, a funeral that became a massacre, and a family caught in the crossfire of a city's spiraling violence. It's about failure, grief, anger, and the haunting silence that follows after the last shot is fired. This is the case of John James Horn Jr., and the final farewell that turned into a second tragedy. He wasn't a gang member. He wasn't part of some street crew. He wasn't looking for trouble. John James Horn Jr. was just a 20-year-old trying to make something of himself in a world that too often chews up young black men and spits them out. Born in 2002, right in the heart of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, John grew up with big dreams but limited options. From an early age, he knew what struggle looked like. He knew how to stretch a dollar, how to hide pain behind a joke, and how to keep going even when the world made it hard to breathe. But through it all, John remained soft-hearted in a world that told boys like him to harden up. People say some kids light up a room. John lit up the block. His smile could disarm even the coldest person. He had a way of making you feel like you mattered, even when he barely had anything left to give. Friends and family say he would give you the shirt off his back, his last few dollars, or the food on his plate without hesitation. He loved out loud. He protected fiercely. He showed up every time. Basketball wasn't just a hobby. It was his peace, his therapy, his rhythm when life felt out of step. On the court, John played like it was his calling. You'd see him on the court just before sunset, sweat glistening, shoes worn out from too many games, but still moving like it was the NBA Finals. Every jump shot wasn't just a play, it was a hope, a prayer, a statement. I'm still here. I still believe. He didn't dream of fame for the sake of being famous. He wanted to succeed so he could take care of the people who raised him, his mom, his siblings, his friends who were more like family. He wasn't chasing stardom. He was chasing stability. Something so many young men like him are never truly allowed to have. John wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, like any young man trying to figure life out without a roadmap. But his intentions were always rooted in love. He didn't want to die young. He wanted to grow old. He wanted to build something, to leave something behind that was bigger than the pain he came from. Those who knew him talk about his laugh, the kind that filled a room. The way he'd crack jokes in the most serious moments just to keep spirits up. The way he protected his little cousins like they were his own kids. And the way he looked his mother in the eye when he promised, "I'm gonna make you proud." But in neighborhoods where opportunity is scarce and danger waits at every corner, even the brightest light can be extinguished in a blink. John was not living recklessly. He was simply living until the streets decided otherwise. He wasn't born into violence. He was born into hope, raised on faith, and molded by love. And yet, in the end, he became another headline, another obituary, another young black man buried too soon. But if you ask the people who truly knew him, his mother, his coach, his friends from the court, they won't talk about how he died. They'll talk about how he lived, how he gave, how he dreamed, and how, in just 20 short years, he managed to touch more lives than some people do in a lifetime. This is the boy they lost. This is the heart that stopped beating far too soon. This is John James Horn, Jr. October 15th, 2022, began like countless Saturdays in Pittsburgh's North Side. The sun climbed slowly over Cedar Avenue, warming sidewalks cracked from time and traffic. Children rode bikes up and down the block. Radios hummed from apartment windows. Life, ordinary and uninterrupted, moved forward like it always did. For John James Horn, Jr., it was just another afternoon in a neighborhood he knew by heart. He made plans to meet up with a few close friends at the Sunoco gas station on Cedar Avenue. Maybe they were just linking up, maybe talking about the next game, maybe even laughing about something that happened the night before. Nothing unusual. Just boys being boys in the only world they knew. To everyone watching, it looked routine. Young men in their early 20s, talking, catching up, doing what many do at that age, standing around, full of life, unaware of how fragile that life really is. But at 3:04 p.m., time split open. A dark SUV pulled into view, slow, deliberate, almost ghost-like in its motion. It rolled toward them, quiet at first, like a shadow. And then, the quiet died. Gunfire tore through the street, turning Cedar Avenue into chaos. Bullets rang out, echoing between buildings, shattering the fragile calm that had hung in the air just moments earlier. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a confrontation. It was an ambush. Surveillance footage would later show what witnesses couldn't believe. The flash of muzzles, the scramble for safety, and John and his friends drawing their weapons, returning fire in pure, raw desperation. It wasn't about turf. It wasn't about ego. It was survival. In the middle of the exchange, as bullets zipped through the air and people ducked for cover behind pumps and passing cars, 2 lives were stolen that had absolutely nothing to do with the violence. Betty Jean Everett and Jacqueline Mahalik, 2 women simply standing at a nearby bus stop, were struck by stray bullets. They were just in the wrong place at the worst possible time. No warning, no mercy, no reason. They collapsed where they stood, bodies folding into the pavement as bystanders screamed. 1 second they were waiting for the bus. The next, they were lying in pools of blood. Then it happened. John was hit. Just 1 bullet. Just 1 breath. And suddenly, he was gone. The boy who gave everything had nothing left. 20 years old. His life gone before it could truly begin. The sound of gunfire faded into sirens. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, faces frozen in horror. Police rushed the scene. Shell casings covered the asphalt. Shattered glass sparkled under the late afternoon sun. A playground just feet away now sat eerily silent, the laughter of children replaced by the heavy weight of tragedy. First responders arrived to a scene of unspeakable carnage. 3 people wounded, one of them a young man already cold to the touch. Medics performed CPR on the sidewalk, their hands pressing into his chest as loved ones watched, begging for a miracle that never came. John, Betty, and Jacqueline were rushed to nearby hospitals, but none of them made it. What should have been a routine hangout among friends became a moment that would haunt an entire city. Authorities later arrested 19-year-old Kyron Troutman, believed to have been one of the shooters in the SUV. Meanwhile, John's friend, 21-year-old Charles Hines, who had returned fire that day, was charged as well. Though wounded in the leg, his bullets were believed to have unintentionally contributed to the deaths of the 2 innocent women. This wasn't a shootout between enemies. It was an eruption of violence that no one walked away from unchanged. For John's family, the news felt like a nightmare. Their son, their brother, their cousin, their friend, dead in the middle of the street, his blood soaking into the very ground he walked on growing up. They say a bullet doesn't just kill a body, it kills everything that comes after. The birthdays, the graduations, the second chances. It kills laughter at family cookouts, holiday hugs, late-night phone calls. It kills futures. And on that day, Cedar Avenue didn't just lose 3 lives, it lost its innocence. 3 lives ended on that street corner that day, each of them gone in an instant, their futures stolen by a storm of bullets no one saw coming. John James Horn Jr. was pronounced dead at the hospital. Betty Jean Everett and Jacqueline Mahalik, 2 innocent women just waiting for a bus, were also gone. Mothers, friends, neighbors, taken by bullets that weren't meant for them, fired in a moment of panic and retaliation. The neighborhood would never be the same. The streets fell into a heavy silence, but the investigation began immediately. Police moved quickly. They followed the trail of shell casings, studied surveillance footage, listened to witness testimonies. It didn't take long before 19-year-old Kyron Troutman was identified and taken into custody. Authorities believe he was one of the armed individuals inside the SUV, the car that pulled up to that gas station and unleashed a nightmare. He wasn't unknown to law enforcement, but what he allegedly participated in that day went far beyond anything he'd ever been accused of before. But what shook the community even more was the arrest of Charles Hines, just 21 years old. He had been one of John's closest friends. That day, he had stood shoulder to shoulder with John. When the bullets flew, Charles had drawn his weapon, some said in self-defense. But the chaos of that shootout didn't discriminate. Investigators believe that bullets from Charles's gun may have struck or contributed to the deaths of Betty and Jacqueline. And just like that, he was charged, too, with crimes that carried devastating weight, criminal homicide, reckless endangerment, and firearms violations. He had tried to protect himself and his friend, but in the mayhem, lives were lost. In the eyes of the law, it didn't matter who started the shooting. What mattered was that innocent people were killed. To the public, it looked like another street shootout, just more senseless violence in a city already drowning in gunfire. But for the families involved, for the mothers who had to identify their children's bodies, it wasn't just another news story. It was personal. It was pain. It was irreversible. John's body was found frighteningly close to a neighborhood playground. The sight was too much for some to bear. A young man in his prime, lying on the ground with a gun beside him, the echoes of laughter from the swings now swallowed by tragedy. That image burned into the memories of those who saw it. To some, he was just another statistic. But to those who knew him, he was everything. People love to make assumptions when young black men die with guns nearby. They rush to label. They rush to judge. But John wasn't a criminal. He wasn't out hunting anyone. He didn't wake up that morning looking for trouble. He was a son, a brother, a teammate, a dreamer. He was 20 years old, trying to survive in a world where sometimes even standing still can get you killed. The deeper truth is harder to accept. What happened that day wasn't just about gangs or turf wars. It was about a broken ecosystem, where young men feel unsafe even just standing on the street, where retaliation moves faster than justice, and where the difference between life and death comes down to being in the wrong place at the wrong second. The police called it a gun battle. The media labeled it street violence. But for the families left behind, those words felt empty. 3 people died on Cedar Avenue that day. But the ripple effect reached far wider. Mothers lost their children. Children lost their mothers. A friend lost his life beside someone he trusted, and a city lost a piece of its soul. This wasn't just violence. This was chaos. This was a moment of adrenaline, fear, and irreversible consequences. And at the heart of it all was John James Horn, Jr., a young man who had fought to stay alive and wound up written off, like too many before him, too soon. By the time October 28th arrived, John James Horn Jr.'s family had spent nearly 2 weeks walking through a fog of grief so heavy it barely allowed them to breathe. Every room in the house held his memory, his shoes by the door, his toothbrush in the cup, his favorite snacks still in the cupboard. And yet, his laugh, once the loudest sound in the room, was now a deafening silence. His mother had spent sleepless nights writing his obituary, picking out the right suit for him to be buried in, and choosing the flowers that matched his spirit. Bold, soft, hopeful. This wasn't the kind of planning a mother should ever have to do for her son. But she did it, because love makes you brave, even in heartbreak. Destiny of Faith Church was chosen for the service, not because it was grand, but because it was sacred. It was a space where many in the neighborhood had come over the years to celebrate weddings, mourn losses, and find comfort in God when the world no longer made sense. On that Friday, more than 100 people gathered to say goodbye to John. They came dressed in black, carrying tissues and pain and prayers. Some were friends from childhood. Others were neighbors, former teachers, basketball teammates. They didn't come just to mourn. They came to honor the boy they had lost. The sanctuary was filled with the soft rustle of programs being passed out, the low sobs of grieving relatives, and the occasional burst of laughter as people shared stories about John, the time he beat everyone at the court, the way he always brought an extra sandwich for someone who forgot theirs, the way his presence just made life feel lighter. There was sorrow, yes, but also love. For the first time since the shooting, it felt like maybe, just maybe, healing could begin. But healing would not come that day. Unbeknownst to the mourners gathered inside, danger was circling once again. Shortly after noon, just as the service was unfolding and people were bowed in prayer, gunfire erupted outside the church. It started as a sharp crack, then another, and suddenly the sanctuary became a war zone. Screams ripped through the air, chairs toppled, mothers threw their bodies over their children. Some ran, some froze, some hit the ground and prayed they wouldn't be next. It was pure chaos, terror crashing into the very place that was meant to bring peace. When the shooting stopped, 5 people had been hit. 1 was in critical condition. The others were wounded but breathing. Blood stained the steps of the church. Bullet holes pockmarked nearby cars. And in the middle of it all, the grief that had only just begun deepened into something darker. Rage, confusion, betrayal. Because this wasn't random, it wasn't mistaken identity, it was targeted. John's family had warned authorities ahead of time. They had heard whispers in the days after his murder, rumors of possible retaliation, warnings that someone might try to send a message at the funeral. And so they did what anyone would do when faced with a credible threat. They asked for help. They reached out to police. They begged for protection. They didn't want officers to stop the pain. They just wanted to bury their son in peace. They were told help would be there, that someone would watch over them. But help never came. In a devastating error that would later be publicly acknowledged, the two officers assigned to the church went to the wrong location. They showed up at a different funeral home, and when they found it empty, they left, never checking the actual address of John's service. The destiny of Faith Church was left completely unguarded. So when the shooters pulled up that day and began firing into the crowd of mourners, there was no one there to stop them. No officer to intervene, no siren to scare them off, just panic and bullets. Inside, people sobbed. Some had to be carried out. Others were treated on the steps by paramedics, bleeding and broken in body and spirit. And while miraculously no one died, the emotional scars would cut deep and last a lifetime. The violence hadn't just followed John into death. It had walked into the church, sat in the pews, and shattered the illusion that funerals could ever be safe. For the Horn family, this wasn't just a security failure. It was a betrayal. They had done everything right. They had mourned respectfully. They had asked for help. And still, they were left to fend for themselves while bullets flew over their heads and children screamed in terror. This wasn't just trauma. This was institutional abandonment. And it deepened the pain of a family already living in hell. Later, Pittsburgh police confirmed that the officers assigned to the funeral had been suspended. But the questions remained. Why wasn't there a backup plan? Who made the final call to leave? And how could something so preventable go so catastrophically wrong? Journalists gathered outside Allegheny General Hospital, where the wounded were taken. A shaken community demanded answers. And inside the church, bullet holes and bloodstains became unwanted memorials to a day that should have brought peace, but delivered more pain. The funeral had become another crime scene. The casket meant to carry John to rest now sat as a chilling centerpiece in a building full of fear. Instead of closure, his loved ones were given new trauma to carry. And once again, the question hung in the air. How many times can one family grieve the same soul? The funeral was supposed to be safe. John's family had already endured the worst pain imaginable, burying a 20-year-old son. But as whispers of retaliation spread through the neighborhood, they feared the violence wasn't over. So they asked the Pittsburgh Police Department for help. Not out of paranoia, out of love. They pleaded for officers to guard the church. And the police agreed. 2 officers were assigned to the service. But on the day of the funeral, something unthinkable happened. The officers went to the wrong location, and when they saw no activity, they simply left. No one double-checked. No one followed up. The destiny of Faith Church, filled with over 100 mourners, was left completely unprotected. So when masked gunmen pulled up and opened fire, no one stopped them. Bullets tore through the air. People screamed. 5 mourners were shot. No one died, but the scars, physical and emotional, will last forever. Pittsburgh police later admitted their mistake. The officers were suspended, but that did little to comfort the family who had done everything right. They asked for protection. They were promised safety. And yet, they were left to bleed. Again. This wasn't just a funeral interrupted. It was a system failure, a betrayal, and a tragedy that never should have happened. After the shots were fired and the funeral turned into a scene of chaos, the questions began. Who would do something so cold, so cruel, as to shoot up a funeral? Who would wait until a family was at their most vulnerable, just to finish what had started? The Pittsburgh police didn't waste time. With 5 people injured and an entire community in shock, the search for answers turned into a full-scale manhunt. Detectives pored over every second of surveillance footage from cameras around the destiny of Faith Church. At first, the clues were small. Shadows, movement, fragments of faces obscured by masks. But then, a breakthrough. One frame. A black car. Seen pulling up just minutes before the gunfire, then seen again, speeding away after the attack. Investigators began tracing its path, street by street, block by block. They followed it through Pittsburgh's tight-knit neighborhoods, from the church in Brighton Heights all the way across the city to McKee's Rocks Bridge. And then, the trail went cold. The car was found abandoned. No keys, no driver, no obvious signs of the shooters. But police didn't give up. They widened the net, pulled more surveillance, followed the patterns. That's when they got their next lead. A pair of teenagers, seen leaving the area near the bridge, nervous, moving fast, one of them clutching something beneath his jacket. It didn't take long before Pittsburgh police caught up with them. Sean Davis and Hezekiah Nixon. Two teens, not seasoned criminals, but boys carrying weapons, running from the scene of a funeral shooting. When they saw the officers, they panicked. One jumped from the car. The other sprinted for the bridge. In the chaos, one suspect dropped his weapon on the road. The other, realizing he was out of time, hurled his gun into the Ohio River, a last-ditch attempt to hide the evidence. But it was too late. Police tackled them, handcuffed them. And within minutes, the boys were in custody, sweating, scared, and now the center of one of Pittsburgh's most shocking criminal cases. Divers were called in to recover the weapon thrown into the river. What they pulled out chilled investigators to the bone. A stolen handgun, loaded, ready to fire, with a live round in the chamber. That weapon, along with the gun dropped on the bridge, would become crucial pieces of evidence tying the teens to the violence outside the church. Charges came fast and hard: attempted homicide, aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, firearms violations. They were no longer just suspects. They were accused funeral shooters. And the city was watching. But behind the headlines, the real pain still belonged to the victims. The 5 people who had been shot. The families who now flinched every time they heard a loud sound. The children who saw blood on the church steps. And most of all, the Horn family, who couldn't even grieve in peace. The arrests brought some relief, some sense that justice was moving. But justice can never fully undo what's been done. Because it wasn't just about catching the shooters, it was about understanding why. What brings 2 teenagers to a place of mourning, armed, masked, and ready to kill? What leads children to treat funerals like war zones? It's a question that still haunts the streets of Pittsburgh. And even as Davis and Nixon sit behind bars awaiting trial, those answers remain painfully out of reach. When a young black man is killed, the world rushes to draw its own conclusions. They say maybe he was in a gang, maybe he was living fast, maybe he had it coming. But John James Horn Jr. didn't live by those narratives, and he didn't deserve to die by them either. His family rejected the rumors, the headlines, the half-truths, because they knew who John really was. Not a suspect, not a thug, not a lost cause, but a young man trying to find his place in a world that made survival feel like a full-time job. He wasn't perfect. But who is at 20? He was a big-hearted brother. He was a loyal friend. He was a son who still called his mom Ma and hugged her like it was the last time, every time. Basketball was his escape. On the court, he found peace, purpose, and power. He played hard, not just for wins, but for something bigger. A shot at a different life. One with less struggle. One where he could give back to the people who had given him so much. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing stability. And more than anything, John wanted to make his family proud. He made people laugh without trying. He gave his last dollar without thinking. He showed up when others wouldn't. That's who John was. He didn't need the streets. He needed opportunity. He didn't carry hate. He carried hope. And when his life was cut short on that October afternoon, it wasn't just one life lost. It was every birthday that would now be marked with silence. Every Christmas without his smile around the dinner table. Every "I love you" that would never be spoken again. His little cousins lost their role model. His mother lost the boy who used to fall asleep on her shoulder. His friends lost the one person they could always count on to keep it real. John's death didn't just break a heart, it shattered a village. And no matter what people say, no matter what rumors spread, the people who knew him carry the only truth that matters. He mattered. He was worth more than his mistakes. He was worth more than a bullet. And even in death, he deserves to be remembered for his life, not his ending. The officers who missed the funeral assignment were suspended. That's what the headline said. Administrative action has been taken. Investigation is underway. Protocol breach is being reviewed. But for John James Horn Jr.'s family, none of that mattered anymore, because the damage wasn't just procedural, it was permanent. You see, the Horn family didn't just lose John once. They lost him twice. The first time was at a Sunoco gas station on a quiet Saturday afternoon. The second was at his funeral, a place meant for healing, turned into a battleground. And both times, they had asked for help. After John was gunned down, the family did everything by the book. They worked with investigators. They planned a respectful burial. And when rumors of retaliation began to swirl, they spoke up. They said, "We're scared." They said, "Please watch over the funeral." They said, "Don't let anything happen." And the police heard them. They promised a presence. They assigned 2 officers. But on the day that promise mattered most, no one showed up. The assigned officers went to the wrong location, and when they found the building empty, they just left. No call, no correction, no follow-up. And just like that, an entire family, an entire church full of mourners, was left completely exposed. No patrol car out front, no badge at the door, no one to stop what came next. When the shooters pulled up, they walked into a vacuum. They didn't hesitate. They opened fire into a crowd of grieving people, children, elders, mothers, neighbors, all there to say goodbye to a boy they loved. 5 were shot. 1 was critical. All were traumatized. And the officers who were supposed to be there? Suspended. Not fired. Not charged. Just suspended. To the public, that sounded like accountability. But to the Horn family, it felt like insult layered on top of injury, because this wasn't just one failure. It was 2. And each time, people bled. Beth Pitting, executive director of the Pittsburgh Citizen Police Review Board, said it plainly. They asked for help. The police knew the risk, and still, they were left alone. This wasn't just about human error. It was about human cost. A young man gunned down, 2 innocent women dead, 5 people wounded at a funeral, and a family left to grieve with no answers, no peace, and no protection. The police department later admitted the mistake publicly. But what they couldn't offer, and what the family desperately needed, was trust. Because when a mother picks out her son's casket and still has to duck bullets while burying him, something has gone terribly wrong. And when the system that promised to protect them instead walks away, that's not just a mistake. That's a betrayal. It wasn't enough to say, "We're sorry." Not after 2 tragedies. Not after silence when action was needed most. What the Horn family endured is a reminder of something deeper, something more painful than even the bullets. That justice can be delayed. Protection can be promised, but never delivered. And grieving Black families are too often expected to be strong, even when the institutions meant to serve them crumble under pressure. This wasn't just about John. It was about every family who has knocked on a police station door and been told, "We've got you," only to be left waiting in the dark. It was about every funeral that should be sacred, but gets stained with gunpowder. It was about a city that failed to keep its word. Twice. And now, what remains is more than sorrow. It's a deep, open wound that asks a devastating question. When will enough be enough? Because one mistake cost John his life, and the second nearly took his entire family with him. This wasn't just a funeral. It was a second crime scene, a second trauma. One family, 2 tragedies. 13 days apart. Violence took John's life. Negligence stained his goodbye. A mother who asked for protection was met with silence. A family who followed the rules was met with bullets again. And in the heart of Pittsburgh, a young man with dreams, laughter, and loyalty became another name in a cycle that never seems to end. But this isn't just John's story. It's the story of what happens when systems fail. Twice. When warnings are ignored. When help comes too late. And somewhere tonight, a mother still sets a place at the table. Still hears his footsteps in her dreams. Still waits for a son who will never come home. This story should never have happened. But now that it has, it can't be forgotten. Let this not be just another headline buried beneath the next tragedy. Let it be the wake-up call it was meant to be. Because every time we choose to remember, we fight against the silence. Every time we tell the whole truth, we honor more than a victim. We honor a life. If this story touched you, subscribe to the Untold Crime Chronicles. Share your thoughts below. And most of all, never forget, every victim's story deserves to be told. Until next time, stay safe, stay human, and stay aware.